All right, good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
I want to start off first, whenever I am at the front, and just thank every one of you for inviting my family in and welcoming us in. With our move, which a lot of you know, we had a church in Orlando that we were very fond of and we were part of, and it was very sad leaving that. And we just feel like this place has been such a blessing for us to come here and be welcomed in and be a part of, and for our boys too, and how they're welcomed here. So I just want to thank everybody for that from the start. So I'm going to give a little bit of a testimony and also a little bit of a message off of that, and it'll kind of make sense as we go through it. But in kind of opening, I want you to think about, have you ever seen someone do something, whether it was on the TV, whether it was in person, that you thought, whoa. I mean, I'm a sports fan, so I think about, some of like Tiger Woods' golf wins. That's things you're never going to see if you like cars, and maybe someone like Aaron Senna's that. I remember the Olympics, Usain Bolt, whenever he set the record, I was watching that, and he did it in 9.58, and you thought, oh, that's never going to get beaten. Today we're going to look at something that Jesus did, which was spectacular and which was unmatched, which was whenever he walked on water. So if you want to first open with me, I kind of have this philosophy that if someone doesn't start by opening the Bible and reading it, I'm not going to listen to them. So I'm not going to do that myself. So we're going to start, we're in Matthew 14, verse 22. And I'm reading from the NIV. Immediately Jesus made the disciples get into the boat and go ahead of him to the other side, while he dismissed the crowd. After he had dismissed them, he went up on a mountainside by himself to pray. Later that night he was there alone, and the boat was already a considerable distance from land, buffeted by the waves because the wind was against it. Shortly before dawn, Jesus went out to them, walking on the lake. When the disciples saw him walking on the lake, they were terrified. "It's a ghost," they said, and cried out in fear. But Jesus immediately said to them, "Take courage, it is I. Don't be afraid." "Lord, if it's you," Peter replied, "tell me to come to you on the water." "Come," he said. Then Peter got down out of the boat, walked on the water, and came to Jesus. But when he saw the wind, he was afraid, and, beginning to sink, cried out, "Lord, save me." Immediately Jesus reached out his hand and caught him. "You of little faith," he said, "why did you doubt?" And when they climbed into the boat, the wind died down. Then those who were in the boat worshipped him, saying, "Truly, you are the Son of God." So I want to first open with challenging us that this is a story that we teach the children about how Jesus walked on water. And we all know it. We've all read it a lot of times. But there's a lot of nuance in it. And that's what I want to unpack, as well as telling you how it impacted me in my life. But first, let's pray. God, help us to understand your word. Open our hearts and minds. May your spirit move. Speak to us. And just let what we're looking at impact us and be something that we can use to change and take out into the world. In Jesus' name, amen. So, for me, this story starts back in 2014. I was a fresh 2-year-old Christian, and I was going on my church's youth break in Rossnowla in Donegal. So back in 2014, people were doing things like the ice bucket challenge. Who did the ice bucket challenge? Anybody? Oh, Bethany. I thought it was silly. It's where you got a bucket of water with ice in it and dumped it on yourself on video and then posted it for everyone to laugh at you. That was the smart things people were doing. Back then, we were on iPhone 6, if anyone still has one of those. And if you're politically minded, Scotland was voting for independence, which I mean, I didn't care about that back then. In church life, though, everyone, whether good or bad, was doing their own version of a song called Oceans, which was less than a year old, which I can't believe it's over 10 years old. But as a fresh Christian, this was a song that I was listening to a lot, and I gained a bit of curiosity, so I started reading the story that we just read in Matthew 14, and kind of questioning myself about it, and unpacking it. On our youth break, we were doing a short little evening where we were doing some worship songs, and it was very relaxed, almost unplanned, a little bit spontaneous, and I think we had a set list of maybe like 6 or 8 songs, but then we ended up singing for like 3 hours, as you do on youth breaks. It kept going and going, but I felt led to give a word at this, and to really unpack the story. And the basic premise of the word was, get out of the boat, get out of your comfort zone, get out of the safety of it. And little did I know that, in a sense, I was preaching to myself, because whenever I came home from that youth trip, I had to make a decision about whether I was going to continue at university or whether I was going to leave university and try to get a job. I was still living in Northern Ireland at the time, and my university option was over here in Preston. And I know it doesn't seem like a big step to go from Northern Ireland to Preston. I mean, it's almost the closest place you could go to if you were going to leave Northern Ireland. The weather's the same, it rains all the time over in Lancashire. But for me, this was a huge deal. And I remember I was laying on my living room floor, because I could lay on the floor back then whenever I was young. And I was thinking through, and then I remember what I told everyone else about getting out of the boat, getting out of your comfort zone. And for me, that moment and that decision is ultimately what led me here today. I was talking to Bethany about this, and how some of you know, some of you don't, how I've travelled quite a lot, and just how a kid from a small farm in Northern Ireland ends up traveling the world, and all the people I've met. Every single time I've ended up placed in a church which is full of amazing people and has been such a blessing. And I don't think that's an accident. I think I can look at this story as a lesson, and that's kind of what I want to share, and also sharing the story. So to go back to that, there's, let's say, 3 categories of people that I want to break down in this story. And first, I want to look at those who stayed in the boat. And the story starts relatively early in it, saying that it was, let me get the exact word, shortly before dawn, Jesus went out to them. So to me, there's a little bit of drama in this, because they've been battling the waves, they've been battling the wind, it's been dark. It's probably between 3 a.m. and 6 a.m. whenever they're out there. So it's kind of like, it's been such a hard night. I was going to try to think of a funny story about me doing something whenever I'm sleepy, but according to my wife, at least, it turns out I sleep like a log. All I can think about is whenever Sully was a baby, she kept waking me up to change his nappy through the night. And apparently I was so sleepy and dopey that I was so bad at it, she stopped asking me to do it. Because I'm sleepwalking like a zombie, and, putting it on backwards and all this kind of thing. But they were obviously a little bit, let's say, affected by their circumstances. Maybe a little bit desperate, not thinking straight. And we know this as well because of their reaction in verse 27. Their reaction whenever they see Jesus. One of them says, "It's a ghost." I mean, they were definitely struggling with their circumstances. And then Jesus, he obviously reminds them in 27, "Take courage, it is I. Don't be afraid." And I think that can be us sometimes. That We're looking for things whenever it gets tough, and we're panicking and we're struggling. And this story has a lesson for us in that. Like I said, Jesus reminds them who he is. He quells their panic and tells them, "It is I." But also, at the end, they have a contribution where they worship Jesus. But I want to look at their contribution as a whole. They were comfortable. Oh wait, sorry, I'm holding the wrong eye here. They were comfortable being safe in the boat, and they stayed in the boat the whole time, the majority of the disciples. And as far as the whole story goes, yes, they survived the storm. I'm sure it was a bad storm. And Jesus caught them and saved them. But they stayed in the boat the whole time, all these disciples. I think it's fair to say that whenever you look at Peter, which is who we're going to next, maybe they didn't fully fulfill what God's plan and what God's vision was for them. They didn't get the fullness of Jesus' power to them. And that's because they were seeing the storm, they were seeing the dark, and they stayed in the boat. Then let's look at Peter. So I think it's really interesting. In verse 28, Peter shouts to Jesus after he says, "Take courage," and he said, "Lord, if it's you, tell me to come to you in the water." So this is after they all said, "It's a ghost," and Jesus said, "No, it's me. Stop being silly." Peter definitely knew it was Jesus. They all knew it was Jesus. Who else is going to be walking in water? Remember that this is immediately after he fed the 5,000. Immediately after, the same day. They'd just seen a miracle of miracles, and now they're seeing another one. So I don't actually believe that Peter didn't think it was Jesus. I think there's something else to it. I think he needed a little bit of reassurance. Now, that's probably not a bad thing when you're considering getting out of a boat in a storm. It's not really something you would recommend your friends to do, definitely. But Jesus says, "Come." And then Peter gets out of the boat, walked on the water, and came toward Jesus. So he did it. This amazing thing that no one else in history has done, Peter also did too. And it's written in the Bible that he did it. Yeah, he maybe had to check it was Jesus, maybe he needed a bit of assurance, but he did it. And I think there's so much that we can learn from that. Then he starts to look around. He sees the wind, he sees the waves, and he begins to sink. And that's us, isn't it? We get out of the boat, we leave church on Sunday, yeah, we're going to go, we're going to share this week, we're going to do this week. And then the world comes at us, you know. Sometimes for me it just takes that traffic jam through Sorby Bridge and getting back home. But it's that fear, it's that anxiety, it's that little piece of doubt in your mind that we let control us sometimes. And you know, he was standing beside Jesus on the water. I think we just need to take stock of that sometimes. So then we look at Jesus and his contribution. In Job 9, it says, "Who stretched out the heavens and trampled the waves of the sea?" Which is more than likely a reference to Jesus walking on water. But one thing that I've always been curious about, even, I didn't share this in the last time I shared the message, but I spent a little bit more time reflecting on it this time, was why did Jesus wait to get into the boat before he calmed the sea? So he says, sorry. Didn't put myself a reference for this, but in verse 32, "And when they climbed into the boat, the wind died down." And there is a passage in James that may explain it. "But when you ask, you must believe and not doubt." because the one who doubts is like a wave of the sea, blown and tossed by the wind. That's James 1:6. And I think that the reason of this was the imagery behind it, of how Jesus wasn't affected by the doubts. He wasn't affected by the anxiety. He wasn't affected by the storm. The storm didn't mean anything to him. He just walked over it. The waves were a product of the wind blowing around him, and the imagery behind that is that he wasn't affected by any of it. So that's a little side note to it, and I think it shows the power that Jesus had over the whole situation. That he was above all of it. So what does that mean for us? Well, when Peter started to sink, he cried out, "Lord, save me." And in verse 31, I've always been fascinated by the response, which was that immediately Jesus reached out his hand and caught him. He didn't wait. Sometimes whenever Sully falls over, my first reaction is to ask him, "What on earth were you doing? Why were you trying to jump off the sofa whenever you can barely jump on the ground and stay standing?" Jesus' reaction wasn't like this. His first reaction was to reach out his hand. Yes, there was a rebuke that came afterwards, but his hand came first. And I think in this passage, that tells us a lot too about how we should expect things to sometimes go. Yeah. Whenever you take a step of faith and whenever you step out into something, it's not always going to go well. It's not always going to look the way that you think it's going to look. And sometimes you're going to have to call out to God and say, "Help me, this isn't going right." And he's there straight away. He's there immediately. Whether you see it or not, he is. Afterwards then, the rebuke comes. "You have little faith," he said. "Why did you doubt?" And that's all there is to it. It doesn't say that there was a back and forth between Jesus and Peter. It doesn't even say Peter's reaction. And that's why I think that the lesson from that is that when we take these steps of faith, that Jesus is there to catch us. And so to go back to what prompted me in this story, the lyrics in Oceans, they talk about, "Spirit, lead me, for my trust is without borders. Let me walk across the waters wherever you may call me." And that's a big step to have to take. That's a big thing to contemplate. I actually, at the time, social media was starting to get rife, and I seen someone repost, or whatever it was back in 2014, it probably wasn't reposted. Someone posted an article which suggested that we shouldn't sing the song because we weren't brave enough to do that. And I think that's an interesting thought. If you ask God to take you somewhere, are you prepared to go? And then second to that, do you even ask? There's another part to it. But this story teaches us what happens when we do. Like I said, Peter did an amazing thing. He walked on water. Only Jesus did that. And for us, it can look very different. We're called into areas, we're called into places that can be uncomfortable. We're called to do things that maybe we're not supposed to do, or maybe we think we're not supposed to do, but what does that matter? And I was wondering what that can mean for us. I think for some of us that just means stepping deeper in our faith. That means spending more time in the Word. That means spending more time in prayer. Maybe it means instead of listening to a secular radio station in the car, maybe you change to worship music. I think all of those things contribute and can make a difference to us. I think it can also mean what our activity is like within our church. You know, do we come to the prayer meetings? Do we come to the small groups? Do we come most Sundays? Do we come every Sunday? Whenever Claire makes an address for people to come and speak, do we look for other people to come, even if we feel burdened that maybe we have something to share? That can be what stepping out looks like as well. Then even outside of the church and outside of just our own faith journey, at work or social spaces, let's say, do people know who we are? Do they know what we believe? Do they know that we come to church every Sunday? Or is that just something that's kept in a little box that's just for us? It's a challenge when you think about it. In what areas can you step out of the boat? In what areas can you make a change in your life that other people will recognize, that then leads you to do something quite special, something incredible, really? And I think that Jesus is always calling us into those spaces. He's always calling us to do more. And then about Jesus, he's always there to catch us. His love's unfailing. His faithfulness is unfailing. Whenever we do fail, when we do that, the rebuke is there in some form. But it's not the main part of the story. It never is. And it won't be. And so for me, my challenge for you all is don't be like the disciples that were stuck in the boat. I didn't focus on it back there, but now we've talked about Jesus and what's possible. We can also talk about the disciples who were in the boat. They witnessed something incredible, but they didn't do it. They fell short of it. And I think it's very easy for us to get stuck in a rut where we just end up living our lives in the boat, comfortable, but still rocked by storms, still rocked by waves, struggling through it. Yes, Jesus is there at the end, but we could have walked on water. Metaphorically, of course. So I wanna bring it back to a little bit to my testimony, just and how in giving the message again, and how God blessed me through stepping out. Like I said, I went to Preston for university, and I remember the night before my mum was supposed to travel back to Northern Ireland. We were driving in the car, and I had lost it. I was about to freak out. I was about to tell her that I was going home with her, and there was no way I was going to stay in England. England's such a far away, scary place. And shortly after that, I went to church for the first time in England. I had a family friend, who had found a faith mission contact in a church, which was not 5 minutes from where I was going to be living. I went to this church, and I made friends that I still have now. That church was such a blessing and such a gift. I went over a couple of months back with Bethany and the boys to see everyone, and it's so amazing that going to university leads to lifelong friends and connections like that. Shortly after I was done with university, I ended up applying for a job in Sydney, Australia, and I got accepted for it, got my visa, got on the plane. I had a far out relative living in Sydney, so I stayed with her for a couple of weeks. And I went to a church that was recommended to me by my mum's work colleague, whose son went there from the same town that I was from at home in Sydney. I seen them about a year and a half ago, when we went back to Northern Ireland, and we were both there at the same time. Then after that, I moved to New Zealand. I ended up in a little tourist town called Rotorua. The same family friend that had linked me with the church in Preston had a cousin that lived in the town across from there. And so she gave that cousin a call. They had a friend in my town. I went to the small group for the first time, and it was a men-only small group, young adult, and it was some of the deepest biblical conversations I've ever had in my life. I remember coming home from that small group and thinking, oh my goodness, I need to start reading my Bible more. These guys are on it. And that was how I I don't find that. I think God places you there. And then eventually I ended up in Orlando, where I met Bethany. And our church there, we got our 2 boys dedicated at. And we made friends for life there as well. And I can't look back at that story and say that God wasn't behind it all. And I can't look back on that story and say that that moment where I spoke and gave this message about getting out of the boat, about having a step in faith, and about trusting Jesus to catch you whenever it might go wrong, about how that wasn't a story that ended up guiding me to where I am today. In summer last year, we had a few things happen. Our apartment lease was up and was about to finish. My little car broke at the same time, and then it was evident that I needed a job change in Orlando. And so we ended up moving with a not even 2-year-old and a 4-month-old baby to Northern Ireland, trusting God that He had a place for us here in the UK. I probably applied for 30 jobs. I got denied for a lot of them. And then this one came along in Halifax. And the detail of the story that led us to be here in this little church in Sorby Bridge is quite crazy. And I had a lot of Peter moments where I was sinking in the waves. Even down to, without getting into detail, we had signed a lease for an apartment over in Willesden, which is very far from Sorby Bridge. And it fell through at the last moment, and it looked like we didn't have a house to go to. And then Sorby Bridge came up, and we ended up here. And so, as a final word, trust Jesus in the moment, whatever He's pressing you towards. He wants you to go. He wants you to get out of the boat and get out of your comfort zone. He wants you to take that opportunity. He'll guide you through it. He'll be there. You might fail, you might doubt, and that's okay, because He's there. So it only makes sense for us to close with a few songs, but one of them needs to be Oceans, because that's where this all originated from. And I want you to think as you're singing it, where are you supposed to go? What are you supposed to do with this? Where does this moment take you to? Don't let it just be another Sunday that it doesn't impact you. And see what Jesus wants for you in your life.
Amen. Thank you.